Well, the under-pressure governments of the Middle East and North African countries, engulfed by a wave of protests, are now resorting to force. Libya, where activists have called for a day of anger, is the latest to now see violence on its streets. In Bahrain, security forces charged thousands of demonstrators. The opposition claims at least 3 people were killed. Tear gas and rubber bullets were used against those demanding reforms by the country's ruling monarchy. And Yemen has seen 6 days of unrest. Over 2,000 policemen tried to put down rallies calling on the country's president to go. And fresh clashes between pro- and anti-government demonstrators have erupted in Iran after massive opposition protests on Monday left 2 dead. And in Egypt, where the military has replaced the government, at least temporarily, strikes there are gaining force. RT's Paul takes a look at whether civilian rule is any closer to reality.
Mubarak's out, the army's in, and the question now, who's next?
It's going to be the army that has to decide which way the country is going to go. It was the same with Sadat, it was the same with Mubarak.
It's nearly a week since Egyptian generals promised to lift a 30-year state of emergency, but there's still no sign of when that will be.
The army knows its limitation. When the decision was taken not to open fire, not to do any slaughter within their own people, they lost the ability to be the next controllers of Egypt.
But they do want to be the controllers of the peace, and therefore the army, if it wants, can keep the state of emergency in place for as long as it says it's necessary. But not everyone thinks its intentions are noble. Finian Cunningham is a Middle East expert in Bahrain, from where visual and internet communications have been cut by the authorities.
The Egyptian military is trying to placate the protesters with their plans to supposedly eventually lift the state of emergency that has prevailed in that country for nearly 30 years. But the mass of people don't seem to be buying these so-called assurances. And in my view, the people are quite right to be deeply sceptical of such intentions by the military.
Maimun Siam is a photographer who couldn't wait to capture Egypt's revolution on film, but he was stopped at the border by Egyptian soldiers.
The last sentence said to me, like, you're not going. I put you in the prison.
So just how different is Egypt today under the generals from the Egypt of yesterday under Mubarak?
The state of emergency was and is a central component of the governing apparatus, whether that apparatus is headed by a figure like the former President Hosni Mubarak, its successor Omar or a clique of generals.
And for as long as a state of emergency remains in place, the hopes that brought millions of Egyptians to the streets remain up in the air. But Egypt's not the only country in the Middle East that lives in a state of emergency. Across its border here in Israel, depending on who you talk to, this country too has its emergency laws.
Our emergency with a small e is because we live in a bad neighborhood. There you have the army in control. In Israel, we're a democracy. Our elected politicians are in control.
Israel, as another state in the region with emergency powers, such powers, in my view, indicate the undemocratic and anti-democratic nature of that state. Israel routinely wages wars of aggression against neighbours. It's occupying territories and terrorising the people in those territories.
Israel is not in a state of emergency. Israel is living its usual life. No one moved from the center to the south or from the north to the center.
But wherever it is, there's no denying that a country in a state of emergency is a country where democracy is ignored. And if in Egypt the generals don't make clear signs to move towards democracy soon, then many protesters might be wondering what exactly they were out on the streets for. Paul RT, Tel Aviv.
And with the United States voicing its support for the revolts, one expert on the Middle East believes that the wave of demonstrations could actually pose a threat to America.
One side, we definitely do have the peoples of different countries, of Bahrain, of Iran, definitely of Iraq, of Libya, of Yemen, of Egypt, we've seen it, who really want to have change. Now, the other aspect that I think that we have to be very careful about is that this will be, and I think it is probably being, either macro-managed and controlled even, and probably is going to be used to favor the interests of certain global power structures. No doubt the United States would like to see regime change in Iran, Iran, but at the same time they would like to see no regime change in Bahrain. And in Egypt, they probably knew that regime change was on the way because of the age of Hosni Mubarak. And well, Iraq is another problem altogether. So I think that we have a generalized situation which the United States, the State Department, is finding very difficult to control.